Are you ready for a shocking revelation that will shake the world to its core? The imminent demolition of a significant dome is set to unfold, leaving the world in awe and wonder. So will this determine the building of the third temple? Let's find out in this video, and stay tuned till the end to know this prophetic event that will captivate your senses. The Temple Mount holds immense significance for both Palestinians and Arabs. They dream of gaining control over this holy site and preventing Jews from ever visiting again. Over time, they have made progress towards this goal. However, in 2020, the United Nations adopted a resolution to refer to the temple as Haram al-Sharif in Arabic, which distorts historical facts. Tensions surrounding the Temple Mount are always high, as demonstrated by a recent incident involving Israeli Minister of National Security Itamar Ben-Gvir. He walked around quietly during his visit, which lasted less than 15 minutes. However, Palestinian leaders wrongly spoke of storming the Temple Mount. Israel faced strong criticism worldwide, even from friendly nations, for this visit. Despite the challenges, the Temple Mount remains open to everyone. However, only Muslims are allowed to pray there. In 2022, a significant increase in Jewish visitors was observed, with 51,483 Jews visiting the Temple Mount, representing a 50% rise compared to the previous year. This reflects the growing desire among Jews to connect with this sacred site. Unfortunately, restrictions persist for Jewish visitors to the Temple Mount. In mid-January, Israeli police arrested 2 Jewish individuals who waved their flag and sang the national anthem, Hatikva, during their visit. They were detained for 5 hours, highlighting the limited freedom of expression for non-Muslim visitors. In light of these challenges, Christians worldwide must stand in solidarity with Israel's desire to visit and pray on the Temple Mount. Supporting their access to this holy site is crucial. Let us continue to pray for peace in Jerusalem, as we recognize the significance of this sacred place for people of different faiths. The Jordanian perspective. Jordan is the guardian of Jerusalem's Muslim and Christian holy sites, including the Temple Mount and the Western Wall. They desire ownership of these places to sever Jewish connections with them. If they were in control, they could ban Jews from visiting the Temple Mount and praying at the Western Wall. While this may seem unlikely, it's important to consider the statements made by Jordanian Prime Minister Bashar al-Qawane, who praised those who threw stones at Jewish prayers at the Western Wall. The battle for the Temple Mount. The Temple Mount remains a highly contentious and volatile location. Palestinian voices often advocate for the liberation of the Temple Mount, emphasizing the spiritual battle being fought over its ownership. According to Ezekiel chapter 20 verse 40, the Temple Mount is called God's holy mountain, where the entire house of Israel is meant to serve him. The Temple Mount holds immense historical significance. It is where nearly 4,000 years ago, Abraham was instructed by God to sacrifice his son, Isaac. King David purchased this land to build an altar, seeking to avert God's judgment. King Solomon later constructed the first temple on the site, followed by the second one. Islam's aspirations. Islam seeks to exert control over the entire Temple Mount. Muslims perceive the presence of praying Jews and Christians as an affront to their own faith, leading them to believe that only Muslims should be allowed to pray on the Temple Mount. Isaiah chapter 56 verse 7. According to Isaiah chapter 56 verse 7, God desires his holy mountain, the Temple Mount, to be a house of prayer for all nations. Satan is behind this conflict, aiming to hinder God's intentions for Jerusalem and the Temple Mount. Recognizing the prophecies in the Bible, he fuels the hatred towards Israel and the Jewish people, contributing to the fierce struggle over Jerusalem and the Temple Mount. In 691 AD, the Muslims constructed the Dome of the Rock on the Temple Mount, where the first and the second temples once stood. It is important to note that this structure was not originally a mosque. 20 years later, the Al-Aqsa Mosque was built on the southern side of the Temple Mount. One of the inscriptions on the Dome of the Rock, also known as the Golden Dome of the Rock Mosque, states, "God has no son," reflecting a theological difference between Islam and Christianity. Following the Six-Day War in 1967, Israel regained control of all of Jerusalem. However, to avoid international criticism of Jordan's expulsion from East Jerusalem, Israel granted administrative rights over the Temple Mount to the Islamic Waqf. It appears that at that time, it was not yet God's timing for Israel to have complete control over the Temple Mount. Nonetheless, the time for that seems to be drawing near. The Temple Mount is God's chosen dwelling place to meet his people. In Hebrew, this mountain is referred to as Har Habayit, meaning the mountain of the house, symbolizing the temple as God's house. Psalm 132 speaks of Jerusalem and the Temple Mount, emphasizing that the Lord has chosen Zion as his eternal resting place, a dwelling he has longed for. The possibility of a third temple in Jerusalem. Many people wonder if a third temple will be built in Jerusalem. Based on references in the Bible, the last chapters of the book of Ezekiel seem to point towards the existence of another temple. However, it is uncertain when this temple will be built. It may not happen until the time of the Kingdom of Peace. There is a possibility that a temple was already being constructed before that time, as mentioned in 1 Thessalonians chapter 2 verse 4, which states that the Antichrist will take his place in the temple of God. This temple could be built by the Lord Jesus after his second coming, as described by Ezekiel. Currently there are mosques situated on the Temple Mount in Jerusalem. While there is enough space for a temple, the Arab people who control over the area are unlikely to accept its construction. Divine intervention may be necessary to remove these mosques in the foreseeable future, possibly through a natural disaster like an earthquake. Another possibility is the emergence of a leader such as the Antichrist or his false prophet, which could propose an appealing idea that the Muslims may still accept a temple alongside their mosques. The detailed description of the temple in Ezekiel chapter 40 through 48 raises another thought. Some believe that it could actually be a depiction of the New Jerusalem mentioned in Revelation chapter 21. This New Jerusalem is said to descend from heaven and may symbolize the church. In the New Testament, believers are referred to as the temple of the living God in 1 Corinthians chapter 3 verse 16 and 1 Corinthians chapter 6 verse 19. If the letter to the Thessalonians suggests that the Antichrist will take his place in the temple of God, it could also mean that false teachers are accepted within the Church of Christ. This raises concerns about how a church can still be called a temple of God in such circumstances. The sacrifice and redemption, Jesus' role. Nevertheless, it is essential to remember that Jesus has already completed the ultimate sacrifice by giving his own life and shedding his blood. The temple described by Ezekiel does involve sacrifices. Still, through Jesus' sacrifice, he has brought about eternal redemption, as emphasized in Hebrews chapter 9 verse 12. His sacrifice has also abolished sin, as stated in verse 26. Jesus has made a sacrifice once and for all, rendering the sacrificial service in Jerusalem meaningless. Offering burnt sacrifices and making sin offerings will not please the Lord. Hebrews chapter 10 verse 6. So why does the Bible provide such an extensive and precise description of the temple and its rituals? Some people argue that we shouldn't take the description of the temple literally. Instead, it alludes to the sacrifice of Jesus. However, I question, why is there such a detailed account? Ezekiel truly saw it that way and was instructed to declare everything he saw to the house of Israel. While we may not need to determine precisely how it will unfold or what will happen on the Temple Mount, perhaps God's plan differs from our understanding. He reigns, and everything will occur according to his purpose as we journey towards the new heaven, the new earth, and the new Jerusalem. The second coming and the reign of Jesus. The Bible states that Jesus will return to the Mount of Olives during his second coming and establish his kingdom of peace and righteousness, ruling from Jerusalem. In that future era, Jerusalem, not New York City or any other city, will be the center of the world. Many nations will eagerly ascend to the mountain of the Lord and the house of the God of Jacob. There he will teach us his ways, and we will walk in his paths. The law will emanate from Jerusalem, and the word of the Lord will spread. Isaiah chapter 2 verse 3. So what do you think of the dome demolition? Comment below your views and subscribe for more.